The exchange sacrifice is a terrible weapon in chess that, if you know how to use it, will bring us some impressive joys. In this example that I am going to show you today, in the game between, with the white pieces, Movsesian, and with the black pieces, none other than Garry Kasparov, we will see an excellent execution, and most importantly, we will learn how to do it ourselves in our own games. And we will do it on nothing less than this beautiful board. Kasparov, with the black pieces, opted for the Sicilian defense, one of the most aggressive defenses against the king's pawn. We have covered it well on the channel, and the variation played was perhaps the most well-known of all within the Sicilian defense, which is the Sicilian Neijsdorf. In case anyone doesn't know it, I'm gonna recite it for you from memory. Knight f3, the game continues with d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. All of this is completely theoretical, okay? Knight s6, attacking the d4 pawn, knight c3, defending it. And now, this is where there are so many Sicilians. g6, e6, e5, knight c6, or a6, which is precisely the Najdorf variation because it was popularized by the Argentine grandmaster Miguel Najdorf, right? Very well. The idea is to control this b5 square precisely, since both knights as well as the bishop could jump there. And also, the idea is to propel the b-pawn toward a quick attack against the opponent's castled position, which is usually located on the king side. Very well. Here, Kasparov uses a move that isn't the main one, which is bishop e3. Normally, this move isn't used because black could calmly play knight g4 and would completely eliminate the bishop pair, since there would be no way to save this bishop. You could see it because if it comes, for example, to f4, we would have e5, winning a piece. If the bishop tries to retreat to the g5 square, the a6 and b5 maneuver would simply end up trapping the bishop, so the only way to save it would be to pull back, and this would surely be a waste of time, although this position has been studied and can be played quite calmly with the white pieces. In this case, Kasparov didn't want to enter this knight g4 variation and opted for the Scheveningen variation, which is this one here, e6. As you can see, it looks like a very quiet variation. I'm going to bring my bishops out to e7 and d7, probably my knight to c6, and my position really isn't going to be an attacking position. However, if the game goes on and nothing happens here, my pawn structure will surely give me an advantageous endgame. But don't worry, that's not at all what I'm saying. Why? Because this game is going to be a real battle. He continues with f3, now continuing to prevent these types of jumps with the knight to the g4 and b5 squares. As you can see, it's true that Kasparov is skipping the principles of the opening a little bit, the first steps of the game, which say you should castle quickly and develop your pieces quickly. What he's doing is moving pawns, right? The thing is, this is completely studied, and it's correct. As we always say, not suitable, eh? To try at home, only professionals can do this. Perfect. The game continues with queen to d2. The white player's already preparing to castle long. Normally, in the Sicilians, white castles long and black castles short. Therefore, there is a fierce struggle where white tries to expand on the king's side, attacking the opponent's castled position, and black does exactly the same, launching the queen side to try to pressure or conquer all the attention of the white monarch. The game continues with knight to b7, long castle. And now, Garry Kasparov develops his bishop to b7. Although it may seem like it's crashing against the pawn chain here, this pawn chain is going to be mobile because we already know that white wants to launch their attack on the king's side. Therefore, this chain isn't going to stay here forever, and this bishop on b7 is going to come to life. In fact, here, literally, the very next move was g4. I'm going through this a little bit faster as always. Why? Because you already know that what's truly important is coming now. Knight g6. Interesting move. This knight poses several threats. The first is being able to jump into the opponent's territory, whether it's, for example, via c4 or a4. The other idea is that it's moving pieces from the king side to the queen side. For example, after this move, queen f2, which already puts a target on the g6 knight with the bishop and queen battery, only defended by the queen. The idea is that what Kasparov wanted to do was move this knight from f to d7. Do you see it? The only difference is that this knight was here and now it's here. Do you see it? The difference it has made. Boom, boom. So now he's preparing to attack on the queen side. The game continues as follows. King b1, a prophylactic move. The idea behind this move is that whenever there's a queenside castling, the king on b1 is much better off than on c1, since it protects the three pillars of the castled position. Also, it's typical in the Sicilian to place the rook on the c-file, which is actually what Kasparov did at this very moment, and this way the king moves away from the potential pin, from the potential threat on the same file, right? The thing is, Kasparov's fundamental idea after this bishop takes e3 is nothing more or less than to sacrifice the exchange for the knight, something very typical to do against an opponent's castled position. Well, how can we evaluate whether the exchange sacrifice is correct or incorrect? This is the most important thing of all. The idea is that for those of you who don't know what an exchange sacrifice is, it's sacrificing one of our rooks in exchange for a minor piece, that is, a knight or a bishop. You already know that the value of the pieces is relative. For example, right now in the middle game, where the game is completely closed, a knight is probably worth the same or even more than a rook. Therefore, this exchange sacrifice is very interesting. How do we evaluate, as I was saying, if the sacrifice is good? Well, it's true that we're giving up 2 points because the rook is worth 5 and the knight 3. We need to see that we are compensated for those 2 points. Ow! For example, one of the typical ways to understand that the exchange sacrifice works is that we can immediately recover 2 pawns. If we can recover 2 pawns immediately, the points are balanced, the material is balanced. Therefore, our sacrifice is surely satisfactory. The other way is, it's true that in this position, for example, I can't recover the 2 pawns, but it is true that I have left 1, the king very poorly defended, very exposed. This is a point in our favor. The other thing is, I've left 2 doubled and isolated pawns on the c-file. Doubled and isolated because they don't have any pawns that can come to defend them. Furthermore, on a semi-open file, therefore they can be attacked much better down the open file. And that is why the exchange sacrifice is very profitable. Mind you, we must know how to take advantage of it. For example, it occurs to me here to place a knight on a5, which wasn't what happened in the game, but we could already start putting pressure on these doubled pawns. We threaten knight takes c3, check, and I take the rook. I can bring in the queen. Once I castle, I can bring in the rook, right? And surely, even if it's not an exchange sacrifice meant to win quickly, it's a long-term exchange sacrifice that seems to have certain benefits. Queen to c7. The knight defends this point attacked by the queen with this retreat, knight e2. The idea is that one way or another, white is going to have to defend here, prioritizing defense over launching their attack. Remember well that it was a flank battle, right? And what the exchange sacrifice has achieved is to accelerate black's attack before white can launch an all-out assault on the f, g, and h files with their pawns. The game continues with bishop e7, although it's true that knight a4 would be a correct move to come and attack. Maybe it's a tad better to prioritize development before we stay with the king in the center for too long, which could bring us negative consequences. Now, white, seeing that black is simply playing bishop e7, a developing move, quickly launches with this move, g5. What's the idea? That, now after castling, which is logically much better than leaving the king in the center, it's true that white is already starting their attack. But who is going to arrive first in the attack, white or black? Well, probably when there's an exchange sacrifice, black usually arrives first. How's the game continue? What does Kasparov do here? Does he try to defend against this attack, or does he continue with his own? Well, logically, he continues with his own. Why? As here, for the moment, moving pawns would only weaken our castled position, and white still needs 2 moves to try to get there. Therefore, knight to a5, knight to a4, I'm recording with the board upside down. The idea is that he is already starting to put very strong pressure on the c3 point, and here white has a dilemma. What do? Do they come to defend with the queen? That would be horrible, because black would simply become very active and would have spectacular compensation for the exchange sacrifice. Things would tighten up a bit around here, the bishop would get squeezed, things would tighten up over here, the rook would come in, right? The idea that the player with the white pieces had here, and a very sound idea at that, was the following. Not to defend this pawn, but to play an active defense, as it's called, which is this bishop to c1, so that now, if Kasparov decided, which he didn't, to capture on c3, it would be followed by knight takes c3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, and bishop to b2, attacking the queen, and when the queen retreats, also attacking the castled position. Therefore, black would be helping white to carry out a devastating attack, both along the vertical lines and the diagonals towards the enemy king. Therefore, here Kasparov, with very good judgment, did not capture on c3, but instead continued improving his pieces. These games are great for us to review and review again and again. I can't even speak, so we can understand the concepts better, okay? You can watch it as many times as you need. White continues with their attack, h5, and the idea is that on the next turn, they'll be able to launch their attack with one of the two pawns. Logically, it's much better with the g-pawn than with the h-pawn, because if h6, everything would simply be blocked and nothing would have happened here. Goodbye, attack! On the other hand, if they launch with the g-pawn, it's much better, since it can't be blocked by the h-pawn because we would capture on f, nor by the f-pawn because we would capture on h. This is understood, right? Now, Kasparov applied one of the best-known patterns in chess against a flank attack, a central reaction. Why? Because the center's always much more important than the flank. You can also apply this in your own games. What is Kasparov doing here? Well, putting himself in some danger because white can pin the knight since the queen on c7 is completely undefended. In fact, here the white player plays queen to d2 with this objective. The thing is, there's a very simple move that places the bishop on d6, which now not only unpins the knight, but also threatens a discovered attack on this queen. For example, here, if white did nothing, knight takes the bishop would already be winning the game thanks to this discovered attack. Therefore, here the white player moves their queen away and places it on a3. The game continues with knight takes bishop. What a strange move, right? Many of you are surely thinking here, let's see, chess teacher, this knight is really good, this bishop, well, it's practically doing nothing, and besides, if I capture, I'm fixing the doubled pawn structure that the white player has here. However, the idea goes much further than that. After bishop takes, it's true that we fixed their pawn structure, but several lines of attack open up for the black pieces. And what are those lines? Well, they start right here. This move, b4, is a very dangerous move. If white doesn't capture, we are going to capture. Look at how this point is already completely defended. Advancing the pawn wouldn't be a good idea either, because then, for example, d takes c would follow, and the lines would open up anyway, and you can already see that black's attack on white is completely lethal. Therefore, he has no choice but to accept this pawn from Garry Kasparov. The idea is that now the pieces are starting to coordinate. There's no need to even capture this pawn. Instead, we're going to take advantage of the open lines with rook to c8. Do you see what Kasparov has done? He traded a couple of pieces and a pawn to open up lines, so he could enter, for example, with their queen and rook, and later you'll see with the bishops too. And also remember this knight, which is perfectly placed on the a4 square. What is being threatened? Well, the threat's obvious. Now the threat is to enter with the queen here with check, and to enter with the bishop. Logically, the white player here is a little bit cautious, and rightly so, moving the king to the a1 square so that, at the very least, these checks don't exist anymore. And if the black player, Garry Kasparov, tries to give this check first, the move e4 would always exist, which would stop everything. Do you see it? So here Kasparov says, well, I'll just take this pawn, and if you take back with the d pawn, you're lost. If d takes e5, if d takes e4, this bishop would simply follow with a check, and this mate would be practically unstoppable. You see it, right? So you have to capture with the f-pawn no matter what. But what happens? Now when you capture with the f-pawn, Kasparov sticks to his guns saying, well, I'll capture with the bishop, since this pawn isn't defending the e4 square at all. If it's captured, bishop e5 would come again, and the game would be won immediately. When the king retreats, the queen would come in, okay? And this would be checkmate, therefore it can't be captured. Furthermore, the rook is under threat. Well, trouble for the white pieces, and here, white thinks the following. If I stay passive now, they're gonna wipe me out, because I can already see they're coming at me with everything. Therefore, I must get active. If I start moving the rook, my position won't be good at all. For example, they could play bishop e5, and this would be a forced mate. You can check it for yourselves. Therefore, here, the player with the white pieces says, I don't care if you take back the exchange. Careful, he's not giving it away, but rather returning it in exchange for going on the attack. Simply put, he's returning the material he already had in excess. Simply, well, Kasparov says, I'm going to take it back. If the rook moves away, I'm simply going to end up checkmating you, for example, by coming in through here. Look, I'll spell it out for you. If the rook comes to capture, we give check. When they cover, we trade everything. The queen enters, check and mate, right? Because the knight covers the escape, you can see it for yourselves. Therefore, the bishop must be captured with the queen itself. And now, how do we continue? Well, now we're picking up some fruit. Bishop takes d4. Well, the position looks pretty good, doesn't it? What's happening? Now white has activated and plays pawn takes pawn check on the f7 square. What would you do here? Would you capture with the king? Would you capture with the queen? Or would you not capture at all? The idea is that we could capture, yes, but there is a much better move you could always make, which is to take advantage of the opponent's pawn as if it were an allied pawn. We place the king behind it in such a way that now this pawn gets in their way and they can't attack us. We've taken advantage of the rival pawn and hidden behind it. And besides, it's better than one of our own pawns. Why? Because they can capture one of our pawns. They will never be able to capture one of theirs. Queen to g2. And now, the idea behind this queen to g2 is that an unstoppable checkmate was being threatened, okay? What was the unstoppable checkmate? Well, let's imagine they try to come over here to attack. Well, simply put, bishop to c3 would end in a forced checkmate. Bishop to c3, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, check. And when the bishop comes to cover on b2, we would simply capture it. The idea is that, with queen to g2, after the exchanges, this bishop to b2 would indeed be possible because the queen would defend it from the second rank. And therefore, Kasparov's genius says, well, if the critical point to save the checkmate is this one right here, then I'll place the rook there. And now I threaten the same thing again. I threaten bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes again, and queen to b2 would no longer be possible because the rook is also threatening it. You see how interesting that is? Therefore, here, simply, the white player says, well, before you check me, I'll cover with this bishop to b2 and you won't be able to continue. Good move. However, Kasparov's combination was lethal. Knight takes, eliminating the defender. If king takes, it would be mate in 3, because if king takes, bishop to a3, double check. And if the bishop is captured, which is really practically the only move, because if it moves towards the end, they would still end up in mate, for example, by coming in with the queen through here. When this bishop here is captured, simply queen to a5 would follow. Check, mate, the ladder mate. Therefore, it is evident that this knight can't be captured. And what do white do here? Well, they play knight to d4, so it's true that it seems like they are giving up a lot of material, but the threat is very big. Knight takes pawn, knight takes e6, check, and they take our queen. And here comes Kasparov's final stroke of genius, which is obviously sacrificing the queen with knight takes rook. Obviously, the white pieces have nothing better to do than win the queen, right? Check, king takes f7, and now they do capture the queen. However, this is already completely losing. They didn't even capture the queen. Here, white already resigned, and I'll explain why. Because after the queen capture, it would simply be followed by bishop c3 check, and that would be checkmate. They could cover with the queen, but it would still end in checkmate. And if it didn't end in checkmate, just imagine the material difference the white pieces have compared to the black pieces. Well, what'd you think of this? You know that if you want to get a chess set like this one, so beautiful, or many others, right? You can get them at the link in the description. And for all of you, just for you, you have the discount code CHESSTEACHER, which will give you not a 2, a 3, or a 5, no, a 15% discount, which if you understand what that means, it's a huge deal. I spoke with the supplier, and he asked me please not to give you more than 10%, since his margins are getting too tight. The idea is that with this 15%, we are also helping to grow this chess shop, which, in my opinion, right? That's why I contacted them. It's the best one I've ever known. They deliver in 48 hours, you can pay in 3 installments, and the chess sets are of extremely high quality. The shipments arrive in perfect condition. I have at least 6, 7 board sets from this shop, from Chess' Art, and they've all arrived in perfect condition. Impressive. They arrive quickly, the quality is excellent, the service is unbeatable, and that's why I decided on this shop to collaborate with on the channel. The idea is that you can get it right now in the description below using the code CHESSTEACHER for an impressive price. If you want your own chess set, you know what to do. I'm not going to force you, it's just for those who want this one or any other. You get 15% off the entire store. I hope you love this video, and we'll see each other tomorrow, as always friends, in the next one. Goodbye.